right, so we're going to have a brief opportunity maybe for some audience questions. If it's possible to raise the house lights, that'd be fantastic. There will be microphones coming around. I'd ask you to wait until the microphone comes, just because we are going to be filming this and would like to get the question. So if you go maybe right here in the front, if that's possible, in the front row. Yeah, miss.
I have a question. When they started opening up the astronaut classes to civilians, like what was the general feeling and, you know, all of the different like kind of engineering agencies that had to deal with it? Was it like exciting or scary to, you know, kind of approach that change?
Did you see the movie Right Stuff? A lot of truth to that. Actually, the new one, the First Astronaut, First Man, excellent film. But I mean, if you're in the Air Force, if you're a pilot, if you just have the need for speed, it's going to come down to, hey, I'm going to be an astronaut. But then the reality sinks in, well, what do you have to do to be an astronaut? Well, first of all, you better understand something about STEM. You better understand something about the world as it works. You better understand about the environment and the harm's way that you're putting yourself in. One of the reasons that most of the astronauts were drawn from the Corps of Test Pilots was because they had those attributes. And then, of course, you've got to be healthy enough to do that and undertake the rigors of it. When I first started going out to classrooms to speak to students in classes, and this is back in the early 60s, I would go out and I would always begin kind of like the church and say, who wants to go to the moon? Who wants to go to space? Who wants to be an astronaut? And everybody would raise their hands. In the 80s, when I was doing that and I would go out to classrooms, I'd be lucky to get one or two hands. Something changed along the way. But I think a lot of it has to do with your perception of what it requires. I think there are a lot more civilian astronauts in the program today because the program is demanding a lot more of those skills that are necessary for the technology that's being applied to run the equipment. More problem solvers, people who are quick on their feet, who can think out of the box. And then the other aspect of that is commitment. The commitment again in terms of any kind of program. Are you willing to give your life to something like that? But the astronauts, and we've all worked with them and met them, they are incredible people, especially the astronauts that we met on Apollo. And they would work side by side with us, and they were one of the team.
Let's see, we'll try and get, okay, all the way in the very, very back, if I may.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sirs, and everybody here. Crazy question, warp speed, will it ever be attained? Speed of light?
Warp speed.
Man to unmanned, warp speed, speed of light, a space vehicle reaching that velocity. Is that possible? Sirs?
You're talking about the speed of light?
Yeah.
Well, probably not. One thing about the laws of physics is the more you approach the speed of light, the less acceleration you have, and so you never, ever get there, theoretically. But just even if you're probably talking about going to other galaxies or something like something is 110 light years away, let's go there. Well, even if you could go at the speed of light, it would take 110 years to get there, and then 110 years to get back. So it's kind of impractical, I think, to work on that and work toward that. It's just not, you know, our lifetimes are too short to think in terms of going to other galaxies and so on. That's my answer. I hope I hit the right.
If you check the NASA website, you'll find that they do have some recent postings there about a warp engine project that's been going on for several years. But it's kind of like the politics that funds these projects. It's, if you can't break the laws of nature, then let's change the definition of nature. So if you change the definition of warp speed, well, then maybe we can go do that. As with Chuck here, I've just been talking with an astronomical society recently, and we were, the frequent question we get is, are there aliens? Is there other life in the universe? Well, actually, I don't have the answer to that question, but I can share with you my thoughts on it, which is there are over 700 trillion galaxies in our universe, estimated. And the 7.5 billion people on this planet is the only life in that universe? I'm sorry, but good old statistics say that ain't gonna be true. There's bound to be other life. But again, what is the definition of that?
Okay, we have time for about 1 or 2 more questions. I do see a small hand in the back.
How did you solve the problems with the engines if they broke down?
Problems of
How do you deal with, I mean, so the engines on a Saturn V were putting out, what, 1 million pounds of thrust, 1.5 million? Just
per engine, yeah.
per engine.
Right.
That, to give you some perspective, that's, what, about 20 times more power than the world's largest nuclear power plant today, right? So how do you deal with a system that energetic and that
Strap your
complex?
seatbelt on.
Well, as I understand, if you had a problem with the engine, when you're going to the moon, you're riding with all the engines lit up. You're 7.5 million pounds thrust, and you're on your way, and you're not going to change your mind. That thing's going. So, if you have an engine problem, something shuts down or something blows up, Apollo had great capability to abort the mission, which means you blow the command module away from the booster, because the booster's one big firecracker when it gets out of control. And then we have the capability of bringing the command module with the crew in it safely down to Earth. We probably spent more money developing the abort capability than we did going to the moon. You guys believe that?
Yes,
We did.
Safety first.
And if
Safety first, that's it.
if you really want the answer, I would suggest that maybe you come to the Columbia Memorial Center or maybe back here to the library for the Apollo 13 50th anniversary. And we'll tell you how that problem was solved.
So on that, maybe I'll take moderator's privilege for the last question here. We aren't just on any stage, we are at the Central Library. Any one of our guests can leave this panel and go out and have access to more information than any human being had on the planet until very, very recently, and just millions of things at their fingertips. If there's someone who is inspired by this and wants to take a book home, there's going to be quite a run on Downey's aerospace history, so we can't all give this as our answer. Is there a particular book that you like to recommend about space history, or more generally about science, technology, engineering, and math that you found gets people a good education or gets them hooked?
Well, I'm ready for this question here, because I knew he was going to ask. Listen, there are so many books out there on space flight, Apollo and the shuttle and all the other stuff. Now, they're all levels, and I didn't know this originally, but think of this. There's a book, a new book, written by Douglas Brinkley called About America's Moonshot, and it's written at President John F. Kennedy's level. Like, what was he thinking? What was he doing? And then there's books about the head of NASA, the administrator of NASA. Those guys write books. George Miller he was head of all manned spacecraft, and he wrote a book. And Siemens, he wrote a book, Chariots of Apollo. So you can go to those levels. Now go down to the astronaut level. All those guys wrote, not all, but a lot of them did, and they're wonderful. Apollo 8, Falling to Earth, which is Al Worden, all of his flights. So the astronaut books are really good. And then you can get on down to where the working level, guys like us, here Jerry writes a book. There's a guy that we all worked with that worked in materials. So many of the Apollo and shuttle problems were materials like metals and aluminums and composite. That's where a lot of problems and failures occur. And there's books at that level. So when you want to read about space, think first, what kind of level do I want to get into? And there's some wonderful stuff out there.
Oh, I had fun with this one also. Let me show you some of my reading lists going back to the 50s. First of all, I highly recommend anything written by Jules Verne. Anything. I have about 30 of his books in my collection. From Earth to the Moon is a good place to start if you're interested in aerospace. But for me, also, Our Friend the Atom by Heinz Haber. Walt Disney made a TV show on it. The other one, Boy Scientist, written by Popular Mechanics Magazine, 1955. Angle of Attack, Mike Gray, excellent book on the story of Apollo. There's another set of books that you might ask yourself, well, I don't just read these. You need to know the people side of exploration. Dr. Dwayne Dyer was a personal guru of mine in terms of how to deal with challenges and problems in relationships and teams. Also Carl Rogers from San Diego University. Anything written by Carl Rogers will not only help guide you in terms of those dreams, but it'll also help guide you in terms of how to manage it and how to get there. And then there's about 15,000 other titles in my library.
I just want to add one thing. I know that somewhere in the archives of NASA, many of the crew members on Apollo took a lot of different pictures of their flights. I don't know of any book that may incorporate some of that, but I would like to know if anyone knows whether there is a book of photographs that were taken by the astronauts. Anybody?
Well, what you can do is go online and call up that mission, any astronaut, and you get a lot of that. It's all online. I don't know about the books either.
I just wanted to have the audience the opportunity in case they were curious about various different Apollo flights, and if you could do that, then you get another part of history right online, which is great. So,
one recommendation that I heard just recently, and I think was very good, there's a TV program, if you may have heard of, called Jeopardy. And they just had a young man on there who just broke all kinds of records, making history with winning millions of dollars. But when they asked him how he could learn so much so quickly about so many things, I loved his answer. He said, I went into my daughter's bedroom and read all of her little books for preschool. I offer the same kind of suggestion. If you want to learn something about aerospace and the history and the industry, don't jump into the deep end of the water yet. Start with just some of the simple children's books on how the space program started, because it will help guide you to a whole other world of exploration.
Here, here. I'll add a recommendation of my own. I just finished Rise of the Rocket Girls by Natalia Holt, which I thought was a spectacular story of a lot of the women who were the human computers right up the street at the Jet Propulsion Lab. So again, a great story about Southern California and its ties to aerospace. If any of you are interested in any of those books, I have a great tip for you. I know of a place where you can get all of them for free. Just come see me afterwards. I can give you some suggestions. Gentlemen, I would like to thank you so much. This has been a spectacular really have enjoyed it. As someone working in the aerospace industry today, I'm always called to mind. There's an old expression, which I usually see attributed to Sir Isaac Newton, of if I have seen further, it's only because I stood on the shoulders of giants. We have a long way to go to see further, but if we ever do, it will be because certainly we were able to build on the stuff you did. So I'd like to extend each of you a personal invitation. If you'd like to come and tour my rocket factory, it would be my honor to show you around. Fantastic. Well, thank you again, and let me pass it back.
Thank you one more final time to William Pomerantz, John Perez,